All right, thank you. For those that know me, know this is not my comfort range here, but we're doing it. So 2023, boom, bubble, bust. That's the question we were answering that we kind of put out there for you guys to come and to see. You know, what we've recognized is that this is the biggest question that's been coming on. We're in this flux in the real estate market, and we're just, there's just a lot of questions out there, and we've been digging deep to try to understand and unpackage that for you. You know, we look at it as our role as is that okay? This mic? Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
So, you know, we look at our roles as like real estate advisors, and in order to advise, we really need to know what's going on in the market and educate ourselves. And going through this process was super helpful for me. I've been now doing real estate for over 20 years as an investor, a salesperson, and advising. And I learned a bunch. I thought I knew a lot going into this, and then digging into this data and information really helped me understand better where we are and what to potentially forecast here in the future here. So purposes is to really introduce, one thing I learned through experience was that the real estate is cyclical. So we're going to really give you an intro into how I think about the real estate cycle, so you could better predict the market and make the best decisions for yourselves, whether buying, selling, or investing. Bring you up to speed on the current market. So we're going to look at local market trends, you know, regional, national, state. And so that we can all make better predictions on what's to come in the future here. So, but my career really wasn't on a path to be a realtor. My degree was in wildlife conservation biology. I went to school in Arizona, and I finished up college, and I planned to have a career in forestry or something like that. So I drove back cross country. Visiting all the national parks, traveling around right after college. And when I came back and landed in New Jersey, I started to look for work, and I landed this job out in San Diego for the National Marine Fisheries Service. And it was an amazing job. Like, it was 6 months on. I worked for 6 months. I'd save up all my money, and then 6 months I'd have off before the next season began, and I'd travel around the world. It was an amazing gig. And you know, when I worked, I'd go 2 weeks out at sea, and then I'd have a month off on standby, and I'd travel around California. And at that time, my old college roommate, Brian, he moved up to Santa Barbara and had been there for some time, about a year and a half. He left a year before, he finished a year before I did. And I go up to visit him and his best friend growing up, Jimmy, both from Jersey, Morristown, and they tell me I'd known them as bartending and waiting tables, and they tell me that they bought a triplex, and you know, we were in our mid-20s, and that was a far stretch from where they had been. So I was really shocked, and you know, in all, I go back, finish up a season at the fisheries. I travel around South America, and I come back, and now they have 20 properties in Bakersfield. And they told me they're going to be real estate investors, and I was like, okay, you know. So they got a triplex. They started with that. So they're up to the 20 homes, and they're really doing it, and it's happening. They watched one of those like Carlton Sheets infomercials late at night, and got hooked, and they started their business. And every time I'd go back and forth to visit them, they kept increasing. They were at a point within like in another year, they were up to like 100 homes. And I was like, what in the world are these guys doing? So I was finished with my second season in the fisheries, and I was about to go on the next, like a 9-month trip through Southeast Asia. And I was having dinner. I got invited at my girlfriend at the time's parents' house for dinner, and her father said something to me that's always stuck with me, and that was that the only way an average American family can get ahead and create wealth is through owning real estate. And that kind of resonated with me. I was kind of had this real estate thing in my head from them, and I looked back at my own situation and made some dots connected to that with my own family. My mom, who's there in the pink, she's from Newark. Her and my dad's a teacher. I was a teacher. And this is my stepdad, Bob. Not him. But they grew up in Newark. When we were 3 years old, they moved. They wanted to, have a better life down here at the beach. And what they could afford didn't get them to Point Pleasant Beach, where they wanted to be. And they wound up moving to Herbertsville. And my mother got her real estate license soon after. So what they did was they bought this house on the left in Brick on 19th Avenue. And and her broker was also an investor, and he taught her that she could also invest in real estate. So they bought this property that was just 2 doors away, and the market went up. And not soon, 5 years later, they fulfilled on their dream of being in Point Pleasant Beach, and they bought the house I grew up in, and they still live in today. So, making that connection, I was just able to see how that related to me and my life. So I got my real estate license. 2000. That was 2002. My mother convinced me to go to real estate, but I should back up. I'm backing up. I now get back from the trip from Southeast Asia, and I go to visit my buddies in California, and they have like 100 and whatever. There are over 100 homes that they own, and not only do they have these homes, that wasn't what was exciting. Like, they had this killer lifestyle. We were all very similar. We like to travel. We like to surf, adventure, all of that. They had all of that going, plus money where none of our other friends did. So they could do a lot more of it a lot better. And it was super exciting to just witness and be a part of, and I have that entrepreneurial spirit. So that's what kind of got me back home. I got fired up. I took my mom's advice. She was like, why don't you get your real estate license? So I did, and that was then. So that was my first office. I was there for a year before going across the street here at Remax. I'll get off that. So what I had was I had really good friends out there that were willing to teach me, and I saw what they were doing. So I could, they moved out to Bakersfield because Santa Barbara is really expensive and it's really hard to make any sense of cash flow investment property. So they bought we're in a market which is like oil country, 2 hours east of Santa Barbara, where you could buy properties for $100 and change. $100,000 home was pretty typical. So now that I saw what they were up to and paid some visits out there to them, all I was trying to do is emulate what they were doing. So I just said, well, I was like, I'm in, I'm doing it. They didn't have a degree or background in real estate or business or anything. They were just, Carlton Sheets people, So I just said, I'll do the same. I'll just find properties, but I had no money and I had no credit yet because I was just getting started. But I had a friend that had a job and had some money, and I had the time. So I got him to go in, and we found properties that were like that. Unfortunately, it was like on a dodgy street, like the farthest place you could possibly get New Jersey from here. Super inconvenient in Vineland. And but I kind of got started. And then I was starting to make some money doing sales, and I had a little bit of money but no credit still. So I convinced my brother, who's right there, to put up the credit. I put up the money, and we bought another property in Point Pleasant not so soon after. And in 2005, some of you might be familiar if you followed kind of the last cycle, was they were giving out loans to anybody, really. If you could fog up a mirror, you could pretty much get a loan. And I could do a little better than that, but it was a time where I had some income, I had credit, and the bank didn't even ask for it, but that's some foreshadowing as to what was going to come with the market. So then, as a salesperson, I land this listing. It was a pretty big deal. It was a $1.5 million listing. It's a 5-unit in Point Pleasant Beach. And I was super excited. I got the listing, and too good to be true sounding, I get this call from this couple from Hoboken, and they say, we want to put in a full price cash offer. And they hadn't even seen it. So I was like, bullshit, you know, it's not. But sure enough, they showed up, they were doing a 1031, they came down, we closed. And you know, with that commission, it was more money than I had or ever thought about having at that point. So, but I was full on ready to invest. So I was going to pump everything that I had back into the real estate. And what they did with that, which was news to me, is I didn't even know you could do what they did, was they were doing a condo conversion. And I always thought you have to go to the town and get all the approval. Well, condo conversion, they didn't have to. They turned it around in 13 months and turned it into this complex for $500,000. Then I relisted all the condos and sold them for $3.3 million. They made $1 million in like 13 months. And they were not that much older than I was. And I was like, whoa, that was awesome. I said, I want to do that. And they said, and I told them that. And they said, well, find some more deals and we'll do them. So, you know, I'm a quick start. So I was like, right after it, within like months, I found 3 properties. We bought two homes on one lot on Lake Louise. We bought 3 homes on one lot on Central. Both of those we were going to do a condo conversion, and then a rooming house in Bayhead it was on a double lot, so potentially build 2 new homes. All during this time, the market, it was like you're a genius, you know, like those guys, the market's just going up 20% a clip every single year. It's all we knew of the guys out in California, me. Things were looking great, you know, and I talk to my buddies, Brian and Jimmy, and they go, we're selling everything. And I was like, what do you mean? You know, they said, we're selling all the homes out there. What had happened was the market had gone up for the $100,000 houses were now $300,000. And they weren't doing it to make the money. They were like, we were still in our 20s, and they were like, we want to do more, and they couldn't buy anything. They couldn't make any sense of the numbers. They couldn't buy houses for $300,000 and rent them out. So they sold all their homes, 2005, 2006, and that's my buddy Brian. And what he said is now is 2006 is the year I should have gone surfing for 5 years. And you know, it's a little foreshadowing. Next year we go on the surf trip with the 3 of us, and we meet up with friends from Australia that we had met from some investment seminars. And Craig, the guy on the right there, gives Jimmy this book that Jimmy gives to me, and it's called Grow Rich with the Property Cycle. Learn to predict booms and slumps, what smart investors know, what drives the property cycle. Well, you know, we're like, what property cycle? You know, property cycle, it just goes up. Real estate goes up, you know. So we, it was kind of our first introduction. It was not great timing to get that book then, rather than, you know, 5 years before. So Brian and Jimmy didn't go surfing. They decided to double down. They took everything that they had and they bought a franchise and identified a new market, and that was down in Jacksonville, Florida. And Jacksonville, Florida had properties that they could buy for $100,000, and they were great cash flow properties. And they're like, found our new Bakersfield. You know, the market's going to keep going up in that market too. So 2005 to 2007, they wound up picking up, like, the reason they bought the franchise, they wanted to fast track it. They'd done like 200 homes in 8 years or something like that in Bakersfield. They wanted to do it in 2. So they buy this franchise, and then people call you and say, I want to sell my homes, and that's how they were buying these properties. They got up to 150 in like 2 years, and on a great track. And then this thing called the Great Recession happened, and it really came out of left field. In hindsight, you look at it and you're like, yeah, duh, you know, that was easy to see, but at the time, you just didn't have that insight to think that it was going to happen like it did. So what followed was a wave of foreclosures, and we'll soon see how, you know, as it turned out, California's market boomed. New Jersey's market boomed. and Florida's market boomed. So while they were buying homes for $100,000, they could have bought those same homes 2 to 3 years earlier for 50. So the market was still a little out of balance from an affordability point of view. So I love this quote. And everyone has a plan. This is Mike Tyson said this. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And their plan was to build up this portfolio. They had the money to do it. The problem that the fundamentals of even the homes they were buying, they could have endured the pain, but the cost of what it required was that they sell property. So the way that they were paying their expenses was they were selling some and keeping some. And when the Great Recession happened, everybody quit buying. So their plan of being able to sell just went to hell. And their business, the cost of that Homevestor's business buying ugly homes, it was super expensive. So it really wiped them out clean. Man in Black, I learned from my mistakes. It's a very painful way to learn, but without the pain, the old saying is, there's no gain. And they during that downturn, they lost every bit they had, all the homes, all the money, and they had a bunch of debt beyond that. So it was super, super painful. And then for me here, the partners that I had there, they got no trouble on a deal up north, and they couldn't make their payments here, so I wound up having to kind of scrape together and buy them out. And I didn't go as deep as they were, only because I was later to the start probably. But I was able to then having to feed every bit of money, any money I made for the next 7 years, I was having to pay that shortfall. The properties. My plan stunk. I was planning on selling them, and if they weren't for buy and hold. So, but then we couldn't sell them without taking a beating. So we wound up having to hold on tight and then paying for those shortfalls. So, but what I give them credit for, especially, is that they didn't quit, and they gained all the knowledge they needed to know to do what they were doing. It was just, the second half was really crappy planning there. So they got back on their horse and started going again. And during that time frame, so they started buying again. Once they got, a few years past that and settled down. And at that same time here, it was the same for me. Like interest rates came down. I was able to refinance and kind of put myself in a better position with what those other properties I had. And then in 2014, New Jersey started to lead the nation in foreclosures, and did so for the next 5 years. And what I knew from Craig giving me that book and learning the hard way was that we were at a clear bottom of the market, and there was an opportunity there. There was a lot of distress sales, a lot of foreclosures. So we started to, and I knew it was bigger than I would do on my own. So I wound up bringing in a couple partners, and we started buying homes. That map on the right is a foreclosure map, and that kind of showed the highest densities of where foreclosures were. So we were kind of following those areas where there was a lot of foreclosures, a lot of distress, with the idea that soon we'd get to a recovery phase. 2016, I go down to visit Brian down in Florida, and his business now is to sell these rented new construction homes. And he's at this, he's doing a seminar where there's like 15 different speakers throughout the country that are all in different markets who are selling rented investment properties, stabilized rented properties to other people. And what was amazing was that we had been flat in New Jersey since we hit bottom. We were just flat. We had Sandy that came after. A lot of these other markets didn't, so they started to recover really quickly. Right after hitting bottom 2010, Florida was already on the way up. A lot of these other markets were as well, and we were flat. So I go to the seminar, I'm kind of backstage with Brian and getting it to talk to all these people in these different markets, investors, and everybody's got the same problem, which is that inventory is scarce. There's nothing for them to buy, and values were up like 50 to 80% in every single market. And yet I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like why are we suffering? And it was really because we were dealing with our foreclosure crisis later than they were. So there was like a lag in that timing. So that had me feel like, let's go. When I got back, I was like, after seeing that, I was like, it all clicked for me that, oh, I see, like as soon as we work through our foreclosure crisis here, we're going to see a boom in the market. We'll be up 50 to 80% like they were. So really what I just walked you through is the property cycle. And Harvard University did this study that showed that the cycle of the real estate market, that full cycle, tends to run at pretty close 18-year intervals from bottom to bottom, top to top, however you want to look at it. So one thing to observe is that, so I'll just walk you through it. Stabilization period, so once you hit bottom in the market on the left there's a stabilization period where the market generally goes flat. People are scared. Then there's a recovery period, that whole green to, sometimes there's a mid dip in the market, but there's kind of a recovery period that leads to a boom, and then a downturn, some sort of correction in the market. And the thing to observe is that the new bottom is always higher than the old bottom. And that's just that real estate over the longer horizon of time is always going up. But you can feel the pain if you get caught, which is what happened to really both of us. So these are peaks and bottoms, just to kind of further bring that. So if you look at the peaks up there, 1969, it's not every 18 years, so don't put your calendars and date it and start buying a bunch of property. There's other things to learn, but it was around 21 years. But then the next 3 18-year cycles really they ran in that. And it's been like that for about a century. So 1990, 17 years later, 2007, 17 years later, we'll be at 2023, and we'll be showing you today that we're at another peak in the market now. Or this year between 2022 and 2023. So it kind of leaves us with that, okay, what's next? Where are we going to be in 2023 and beyond? So the way I see it is that I don't think we'll be immune to any market. So then the question will it be more of a mild downturn, a moderate, or more severe? Like a downturn or a bust? So that's what we're really going to try to work through and unpackage for you today. And I just want to now look at this map, and then the story I just told you about Brian and Jimmy and myself. This is Bakersfield timing perfection, right? They didn't know. They were just buying because they saw the infomercial and then started. But 1998 is when they started. It was early recovery. They stopped buying by like early boom, and then they sold everything right at the peak. It was like genius if they walked away. But then they bought right at the peak, and then they sold. They tried to, they couldn't sell, and they wound up losing everything during that bust period. So that brings us through that first cycle, the left side that's kind of faded out there. That was what we just walked you through. And then now we're in a new cycle, and we're in a position where, they were buying low in Jacksonville again, and we were buying low. I was buying low in the foreclosure markets here. And, you have an opportunity to sell high if you know how to read this market better, or to hold long term, which always will work. If it's part of your plan, it can make a lot more sense to just keep holding. So that is brings us to current day, or current moment, which is we're here. So what's the future? Are we going to see a downturn? Are we going to see a bust? And that's kind of what we're going to look to unpackage there. I'm going to bring Cortland to make this exchange, but we're going to look a little bit more at the data. Cortland's going to bring you up to speed on the real estate, this year's trends. Cortland and I have known each other since we were teenagers. He is a Point Pleasant lifetime resident. He is the chairperson for the Board of Adjustment in Point Pleasant and has a ton of knowledge about all things real estate. So,
thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. Oh, you're too kind.
And then I'm going to come back.
Y'all are too kind. Thank you so much. Give me just a second as I get this microphone going. I do want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. You guys are amazing for being here on a Tuesday night in January. It's so good to see all your smiling faces. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. I'm going to get all my stuff I got here. Everybody's doing good? Pizza's good? Beer's good? Everybody's happy? All right. Y'all still with us for this next portion? All right. I'm going to make this as short and sweet as possible, but it's a really, really important element because we are going to talk about local real estate data. We're going to walk through some of the inventory numbers and through some of the home valuation numbers. So just stay with me for a few minutes because I want you guys to focus on some of these points because there's some really important takeaways here. So as long as I can work this clicker, which I can. So we're going to talk specifically about Monmouth and Ocean County. That's where we live, the Jersey Shore, that's where we are. That's where we live and work, and that's what we're going to focus on here. And the numbers from 2019 to 2022, both on the inventory and on the value side, are just unprecedented. They're unlike really anything that we've seen. And as an example of that, if you looked from 2019, and 2019 was not a booming year necessarily. It was indeed not a year with a whole lot of inventory as you would regularly expect. But what we saw when the lockdowns and the coronavirus all started in March of 2020 was the precipitous drop in listings. People were staying home, they weren't going out, they certainly weren't listing their most important thing that they had for sale at that time. And that trend continued into 2021 when you saw a drop to just under 2,400, and then into 2022 last year with a low of 2,113 homes, equating to an 185% drop in inventory. That kind of drop simply had not been seen, and the consequences of it, which we'll look to in the next screen, have to do with obviously home values. And really, folks, it's the law of supply and demand. We saw supply just absolutely bottom out in a way we'd never seen before. So concurrently, we also saw prices or home values rise in a way that we would rarely see, especially over such a 3-year period. When we went from $369,000 median valuation in 2019 through 2020 up to $425,000, nearly $500,000 in 2021, and past $500,000 up to $560,000 in 2022. Again, representing a 52% increase over just a 3-year period. Homes typically don't appreciate at that type of value. And y'all saw the stories. Y'all saw this is a reflection of the buyer demand, right? We have the law of supply and demand. You saw the stories about the open houses where people were raiding around the block, or you've heard about, or maybe some of you have been involved in those multiple bidder, highest and best situations, right? I'm seeing some nods out there. So I know folks have been through that experience and they understand kind of what this market has been like. And it's a fascinating look because these last 3 years in Ocean County, the market has really completely transformed. And we're going to look at that from another perspective in a minute through the lens of the inventory. We talked about supply. Well, in real estate, we call supply inventory. So what is inventory? What does it mean and why is it important? First off, I want to point out that this balanced market, this broken line here, is basically 6 months of inventory. Now, when we talk about 6 months of inventory, what does that really mean? Well, what that means is if you started with month 1 and you didn't list any more homes for sale at all during those 6 months, and the buyers kept showing up at the same pace, at the end of the 6 months, the homes would be sold out. There'd be nothing more for people to buy. Now that 6-month period is important because it is looked at as a balanced market. Anything over 6 months of inventory is considered a buyer's market. Anything under 6 months of inventory is considered a seller's market. And you can see just from the visualization that we have been in this clearly unprecedented seller's market going back. We have data back to 1999, clearly goes back further than that. In fact, these are all-time lows. There has never been 1.9 months of inventory for sale. And again, folks, what that means is that if there were no other homes listed during that certain period, after just 1.9 months, all of the homes would be sold out as long as buyers kept showing up. And what happened during the coronavirus? The buyers kept showing up, right? They kept coming out. We saw all the stories that we talked about. So I do want to focus on a little bit here. We have the last run up, right? You can see there in those gold and yellow lines from 04 to 06. And as values increases, you started to see the inventory increase as well. And then when inventory started to peak out, well, that's when the value started to drop a bit. So now what we're seeing is this incredible seller's market where values are increasing, inventory is still very, very low, and Jamie's going to address where we're going with future inventory in just a little bit. But it is really important to point out that inventory is the story of this market. If there are still 2 or 3 or 4 months of homes for sale, it's technically going to be considered a seller's market. And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of homes to come back online for sale in order to get back over that 6 month to the buyer's market. So that's a little bit about what inventory is, what does it mean, and why is it important. And again, we want to take all questions in just a little bit. I'm sure there'll be questions about some of this and some stuff I may not have mentioned. But to really illustrate it, just to bring it home, in the last boom, right, over 04 to 06, you had 9,016 homes for sale, 4 times as many as homes for sale back in 2022. So inventory is really driving, it's the fuel of this market, and it's something that we definitely urge everybody to keep an eye on. And as far as keeping an eye on things, that kind of brings us to our next point. One of the reasons everybody's here is not just to learn about, well, where we've been, but where are we going, right? Jamie talked about this kind of being a transitional period, kind of being the peak of the boom. So then the question becomes, where are we headed? If there's going to be a downturn, is it going to be mild? Is it going to be moderate? Or is it going to be severe? Now, obviously, everybody in this room is looking for a mild, if anything, but let's look at actual indicators. We're going to look at 4 economic indicators that everybody can watch throughout the course of the year, throughout every month, to better understand, are we going to be mild downturn? Is it going to be a moderate downturn? Or will it be a severe downturn? So let me just skip over to those next. So we have a little matrix here, right? The key indicators, and everybody kind of knows these intuitively. The stock market as a basic barometer for the economy, right? When the economy is going well, when the market is up, the housing market is up. When the economy isn't going so well, when the stock market is down big time, housing has a tough time as well. When the market is in a kind of a transitional influx time, like we're in right now, same holds true for the housing market, a little bit of a fluctuation time, exactly what we're in now. So in this scenario, if the stock market goes up or remains kind of in this flat phase, if you will, it's kind of undecided phase, then we're more likely to see a mild scenario, especially if that's mixed with flat unemployment. Now we have unemployment numbers are really, really strong right now. There are some job loss in the tech industry, but overall, companies are hiring and unemployment's very, very low. So a good sign overall. Interest rates are a key issue because that impacts affordability. And the interest rate shock that a lot of buyers have seen over the course of the past year brought interest rates, 100%, they doubled over the course of a year. And that impacted folks' affordability. Suddenly they went from being able to buy a $500,000 home to being able to buy a $425,000 home. And they didn't say anything they liked the $425,000, so they stopped buying. So you get that reduction in affordability, you get that reduction in buyer activity, you get a slowdown in sales. And of course, the inventory story, which we talked about. How much inventory is on the market? How many homes are for sale? How many months of inventory do we have? Well, if those numbers remain flat or go up, but stay under that 6 months, then we're more likely to have that mild downturn scenario. Now, the scenario that nobody wants to see, but we should all be aware of, is the next one, right? And that's the severe scenario. And y'all can kind of intuitively get this. If the stock market is down, if unemployment is up, if interest rates are up, and if inventory rises past that 6 month dash point, that balanced market, you're going to have a more severe downturn with inventory rising and values and prices falling over time. Now, Jamie's going to make the case later based on data that we're probably not going to end up in this severe mode, but it is important for people to realize these economic indicators. And when you hear about it in the news, how does it impact us here in Ocean and Monmouth County? How does it impact residential real estate? And one thing I do want to mention is, we don't expect y'all to walk around being glued to the Wall Street Journal or, CNBC or anything. So if you follow us on social media, we're going to start putting out this data on a monthly basis so you guys can get a sense of exactly where things stand on a month-to-month basis. Of course, we're always available for questions and additional input and feedback, but we do want you guys to know that you can follow along at home. You can do your own research. You can also follow the Paradise team on our social medias to get this information on a regular basis. With that, I have talked for more than long enough. I do want to thank everybody so much for coming out tonight. It's such a delight to see your smiling faces. We're all going to be here for questions afterwards, and I'm going to pass it back to Jamie. We'll do our mic transition, and again, thanks so much, everybody.
All right, so that brings us to really the next slide that I wanted to get into. It's very messy, but we were putting this together because the one thing it's really hard to follow all the things on the economy, but realtors, especially dealing with clients, see these cues every day, and they're the mood cycles of how people are at different times in the market. And it's something that, you know, even at home, even if I didn't show you this, you'd see it. You see it in the media, in the news, and you just see it from people talking and communicating. So, you know, we're going to walk through like stabilization, you know, that flat market. And remember that the market just hit bottom. So people are super cautious, super worried. They're worried that they're going to buy it and it's still going to be dipping. Some of the indicators that you see there are foreclosures and distress sales during that time. There's lots of inventory. Then you get to this recovery period. At the early stage of the recovery, people are still cynical. General disinterest. People don't care about real estate. They're sick of it, really, because they just lived through this downturn for a lot of people. And then as the time, that longer stretch of time in the recovery happens, you know, the sweet spot, especially for agents, a lot of people think like, oh, you must have loved this last few years. It's like hell, you know, last few years. The sweet spot is a nice balanced market. People want to sell a house and buy a house. It just happens. You know, you can predict it. It feels good and easy. That's kind of, and that's usually within a balanced market. It's neither you know, benefiting the buyer or the seller in a 6 months balanced market, like Cortland talked about. And then you get into this boom cycle, and it creates a no fear, no analysis needed. You know, it's so hot and so fast that you don't have time to even think. So you just have to react, and you know, and then you see that FOMO show up. You know, that fear of missing out. Flippers start to enter the market, and it creates like a frenzy-like environment. I don't have to talk much about it because everybody's just lived it if they've been paying attention. And inventory is very low. You're now in a seller's market, and then as that cycle turns, creates this fear and panic, especially if it's a more dramatic downturn, and buyers pump the brakes, and you see this fear and panic of and it becomes a buyer's market again. And that's kind of the cycle, and I feel like it's so easy. It's actually easier. It's in that book that I had, and it was an eye-opener, you know, and you really could see that so clearly. So be paying attention to that if you want to know where the real estate is. You don't have to know all the analytics, just see what people are thinking. So don't get caught up in all the numbers here, but I'm going to show you at the top. This is the boom cycle appreciation by every state from 1998 to 2006. And what we did was we created this data here for we bucketed them into 3 groups: the hottest third, the middle, the warmest, and the coolest. And you see New Jersey right up there, 134%, ranked number 6. California and Bakersfield, number 1. Florida, number 2. You know, so when you see that downturn, you could see this correlation. Market, if I grouped all the hottest markets, it was the hottest third was up 125%. In an 8-year period. The warmest was up 65, and the coolest was up 39. So you know, probably a little bit more normalcy over an 8-year period of time. So what I was just saying was that there is a correlation between the hotter you were, the bigger the fall. You know, so when we look at that data, the hottest market that was up 125 went down the most, 121. The 65 went down 9, and the coolest area went down 5%. A pretty modest downturn, more recoverable. It doesn't seem like a lot, and it's not a lot. If a market goes up 125%, is it really that painful to go down 21? And the answer is no, unless you bought right at that peak and then you needed to sell, because 21% is a hell of a lot of money. If you spend $1 million and it's now worth 8, that's a problem, you know. So, you know, so now we're going to look at where we're at today. And this is like a shock to me, right? Like we've all lived through this cycle here, and I've been like, man, this has been the craziest market I've ever seen in New Jersey. Crazier, I was selling homes in '06, and I never saw anything like what we saw in this cycle, and yet we're in the bottom third. I was like, holy cow, look at that. We're up 65%. You know, look at Idaho, 172, 172%. I mean, booming. In fact, I kind of just bolded if you notice, the whole Northeast is really is in that bottom third, and a lot of it I think is so driven by COVID and the cities. And you know, New York had a lockdown. Their market couldn't appreciate. It's actually going the opposite way. You know, you think about it, Boston, other big cities on the east that really got more negatively impacted than when you look at the west in the hottest and the south. So what do we see? 118% appreciation in that top third. Market up 80%. And 57. So I heard a lot of people leading up to this, and me doing just the research for it. Me and Debbie. I'll say Debbie's done a ton of research. Debbie did all the research, actually. I helped analyze it. So we did. Diving into this, I was like, everybody, I kept hearing like, oh well, this isn't like the other cycle. This is like everything's different about it, and there are a ton of differences. But the reality of it is, this is hotter. We're hotter in this market than we were the last. Not New Jersey, but over the whole nation. So greater cumulative appreciation. If we're extrapolating that data, and if it went the same way. If the market took a negative downturn the same as it did in the last cycle, we'd be down 20% in the hottest market, 11% in the warmest, and down 7% in the coolest, which was, you know, hey, not, you know, if you live over there, I'd be a lot more worried. So it really brings us to like predictions, and they're predictions. They're not. It's like my best assessment based off what I think we're at, and don't do anything with it except just understand that. So I'm going to start with this year's predictions, which is much easier because we can see, like we already have a pipeline of wherever we're at today, we can forecast easily what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Cortland just shared with you, we're at 2.2 months of inventory going into the year. So until inventory really gets to a little bit more balance, we're not going to see this market shift in the next month, 2 months, probably 6 months or greater. So I do expect that inventory will go up. Well, let me start with values. So I'm going to say values up 3% this year, and I'll explain that a little bit more. I think values are going to stay flat for the better part of the year, and they might even dip. What's confusing a little bit in the data, I'm not going to go there today, I promised Mary Beth I wouldn't, is this other slide that I was going to do. That explain that markets that go, if you take a median sale price, I won't even go there. I said I wasn't going to do it, it would have been better with the graph, so I'll just skip it. Markets, it's contrary to what I'm saying. I'm saying the market's going to be flat, and yet I'm saying the market's going up, but it's data. And it's just that it lags. I'll just keep it at that. And if you have a question, if you really want to know, if you're a geek like me on it, then I'll go over it with you. Inventory up 75%. And that seems like dramatic, right? But it's like, yeah, but we're at 2. So if it goes up 75%, we're still very much in a buyer's market. So the inventory is not likely to shift anytime in the first half of the year dramatically. Maybe by the year end, I would see that it could be double, but the average over the course of that time frame will probably be, I'm just saying 75%. I'm thinking it could be a range of, 75 to 100. Economy, I think the economy overall is going to continue to see some collateral damage by the hyper appreciation in a lot of other areas in the country, and I feel like we're going to get dragged down in that. It really comes down to a lack of affordability. I think that'll be, if there's a big downturn in this market, I think it's going to be the lack of affordability that really is the biggest driver of that. If that happens, there's job loss, so forth, so on. And I think the mood, now that's more national. The mood I'm talking about for New Jersey, and I was talking New Jersey here, is largely flat. You know, like people aren't, buyers, interest rates are expected to continue to go up. At best case, they flatten, they don't. And if that happens, you know, I think the buyers still don't want to pay a lot more, but they're showing up. We're still seeing bidding wars. There's still this lack of inventory, and that should keep things relatively like, all right, I'll still buy. I'm not excited about it. I think, you know, but so that's my prediction for this year. Values up a bit, largely flat. So now this is a little bit longer term prediction, 24 to 27. Again, it's really hard to predict how things are going to go. There's so many uncertainties that will happen, but I see us more in that soft landing. A lot of this data was driven from extrapolating where being in that bottom group, being in that bottom third. I think that we'll see nationwide values are going to get hit harder. But New Jersey will see a little bit more of a soft landing. Down 7% from up 52, I think, is a recoverable. I think that it might be, you know, more in like that 5 to 10 range, but I think 7's about the number, so we can mark that down and see if I'm right in 2027. Inventory has nowhere to go but up. It's been up, although it's at 2.2. If we went back last year, we were at 1.5, 1.6 at this time. It was insane. So we've doubled. Like when I said 75% increase in inventory, it went up 100% last year. Nothing dramatic. Economy, as a result of what I just said, I think that we will see the downturn of the economy and the mood generally down over a longer stretch of time. And that's just part of the cycle. I'm not just, you know, that's what happens when we get influenced, even when Idaho, the news loves to sensationalize and sell stories. So when Utah or Idaho's market starts to really come down, it will be on our news. Like they'll grab those stories, and that does impact the mood, even though it's nothing to do with our story. So I just expect that helps. That's what causes us to get dragged down. So what I'd say about it is that when we look at this, in some ways the way I think about it is that mild will be likely more of that bottom third, that moderate will be more of that middle third, and that severe will be more of that top third. Does that make sense? You know, so we see, you know, so it's not that, you know, as a nation, we don't get impacted as a whole nation. You get impacted where you live and your circumstances that have you there. But I think that for us, it's somewhere between mild to moderate in New Jersey and most of the Northeast. So that is my prediction. Final answer, no bust. Correction, yes. All right. So takeaways. There's Jimmy, Brian, and myself. And what I say, takeaway number one, if you want to believe these three clowns. Time will make all real estate mistakes go away if you can hang on long enough to get to the next hill. And I think that's true. What we see is that if you bought a house at the peak, what those bombs represent is you bombing out buying a house at the peak of each market. Peak of 1969, you bought a house, the median sale price is $23,000. The next peak, it's up to 127. The next peak, 2007, we're up to 245. And today we're up to 455. So as we see these, you know, it's a clear story. If you can hang on, if you bought at the peak, as long as you could have hung in there to get to the next hill, you were not only fine, you actually did amazingly well. And that's the story of real estate for long-term buy and hold. So the real lesson or takeaway is just don't overextend yourself. Really, that's what almost got me in trouble and got them in trouble, was just overextending. If you could buy properties that could cover themselves, or if you're buying for yourself, make sure that you've put yourself in a position that you can still afford it with some downturn economically within your family or yourself. So takeaway 2, predicting the real estate market is not as hard if you know what to look for. So what we talked about was moods, the cycle, and local values, and the economy. And like Cortland said, we track all this, and we're going to be sharing that through our sites and social media if you want to follow that to really understand where things are at. So Warren Buffett says it's good to learn from your mistakes. It's better to learn from other people's mistakes. So that's the lesson for the day. None of this is possible without Ruthie and setting everybody up, doing all the invitations, and Debbie, Mary Beth for having the idea, and Cortland's help. And I think that's it. Thank you, guys.